A very big hello to everyone and a big warm welcome to the President's Design Award 2020 Jurors Forum webinar, Creating a Better Future by Design, in conversation with Design Changemakers. My name is Juliana Yao and I will be your MC for today. This event is organized in conjunction with the President Design Award 2020 jury session, which just concluded yesterday. It is jointly presented by the Design Singapore Council and the Urban Redevelopment Authority and supported by the National Design Centre. The President Design Award, also known as PDA, is Singapore's highest honour for designers and designs across all disciplines. It recognizes the achievements of an extraordinary group of people, making a difference to the lives of Singaporeans and the global community through excellent design. It was established in 2006 and is jointly organized by the Design Singapore Council and the Urban Redevelopment Authority. And since its inauguration, 41 Designers of the Year and 108 Designs of the Year have been awarded. In 2017, the President Design Award was revamped to focus on impact, to emphasize the impact of design in transforming work and businesses, raising the quality of life, enhancing culture and connecting communities, and advancing the design industry to the role of the designer. This event here today is also part of the National Design Centre's A Future by Design program lineup for December 2020. Today, we are very honored to have 5 esteemed panelists from our President's Design Award jury panel, all from various disciplines, to share about how design can raise the quality of life, enable economic transformation, and create a better future. But before we delve into the session proper, I'd like to highlight a couple of house rules just to keep today's session running as smoothly as possible. You want to be informed that this webinar will be recorded and that your microphones will be automatically set on mute throughout the session. However, we most definitely welcome questions, so if you do have any, feel free to submit them through the Zoom Q&A function. Should you encounter any technical issues, you can feel free to reach out to our technical team through the Zoom chat function. And without further ado, let us welcome architect Mark Kwee, Executive Director of Design Singapore Council, and architect Larry Ng, Commissioner General for Singapore Pavilion at Dubai World Expo 2020, Prize Secretary of Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, and Registrar of Board of Architects for their opening address.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Well, good afternoon to our guests joining from Singapore in this part of the world, and a good morning or evening to those joining us from across the globe. Thank you for joining us today at our President Design Award 2020 Jurors Forum. It feels really great to have the support of so many friends, associates, and enthusiasts from here and afar as we come together to actually reflect on a super unprecedented, tumultuous year that is 2020. It's coming to an end. And look forward with optimism to how our design community can actually be a force of change as we try to write a new chapter for 21. Indeed, 2020 has certainly been an unusual and trying year for all of us. And despite the challenges, humanity has prevailed. And it's heartening to see how Singapore and other nations around the world have responded to the pandemic with resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity. From professional designers in private practice and in-house design teams to local businesses and even the general public, a spirit of entrepreneurship, innovation, and collaboration has actually blossomed out of these tremendous constraints. And many of these stories can be told through the lens of design and design thinking. In the exercise of deep empathy for marginalized groups that emerged from the pandemic and the collaborations across different stakeholders to create solutions for them, showing what I'm deeply convicted of, the power of design for impact. And this transformative power and the impact of design is really at the heart of the President's Design Award. And now more than ever, especially against this current backdrop, are we reminded of our responsibility as designers and of design's higher purpose in solving societal challenges to create a better world. I'm really proud to share that these ethos are demonstrated by the 2020 crop of President Design Award recipients that our esteemed multidisciplinary jury panel, really who has comprised of design leaders and impact experts from Singapore, China, Denmark, Spain, and the UK, just selected in the past week. And if you were in our jury sessions with us, literally people were dialing up from 4 to 5 countries around the world. This was of course during the PDA jury session, which adopted a blended format of on-site and virtual interviews for the first time. And with our local jurors here, joined by our international jurors who dialed in. So we look forward to announcing the results in May next year during the award ceremony at Istana, where we can come together. We're actually very privileged to have 5 of our jurors here today. Dick, calling in from London. Hi, Dick. Khian, hi Khian, from Singapore. Lekshmy, calling from Barcelona. Welby, calling from Singapore. And Melissa, calling from Singapore too. With Dick and Lekshmy joining us from overseas, really early in the morning, that's what I understand. Hailing from different disciplines and sectors, the 5 of them will lend breadth and depth to the important discussion on how design can drive change and create a better world, especially right now in a future fraught with uncertainty. For those of you in the audience this evening, I hope you'll also take the opportunity to participate in the exchange, especially during the Q&A sessions. We may be separated by time and place and space in this virtual Zoom room, but please let that not deter your voice from contributing to this crucial conversation that will impact our collective future. And I look forward to the next forum in the next cycle where we can actually get together again. With that, I would like to wish everyone an engaging discussion ahead and hear how we can create a better future by design. And now I'd like to pass the time over to my colleague from URA, who's also on my right, or at least on my screen, architect Larry Ng, for his remarks. Larry, please.
Thank you, Mark. Well, distinguished speakers, friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to the President's Design Award 2020 Jurors Forum. Of all the 13th edition so far, this is the 13th edition of the President Design Award. This is the first time that the Secretary has adapted the forum to a digital setting, and it turns out to be an excellent way for us to connect with one another virtually and to reach out to more people across the different zones. Indeed, this year has been a challenging one for all of us. The events since the start of year 2020 have tested the mettle and resiliency of Singapore as well as the rest of the world. The pandemic has served as a catalyst to rethink the way we live, work, and play while staying safe. In months following the pandemic outbreak, designers and architects have shown their creativity and resourcefulness in coming up with cutting-edge architecture, engineering, design solutions to adapt to the needs of their cities and people. I'm heartened that our design and architecture community has also caught up with the curve. The recent crisis has also shown that designers and architects should continually enhance the understanding of the design practice and continue to innovate. Good design is not only a hallmark of a modern, progressive society like Singapore, but also enriches and improves people's lives. Designing in response to environmental and community outcomes, creating places that people want to live in, and to ensure that human interaction still feel meaningful across physical and social distances will be all the more important under the current climate of changing perceptions, and priorities. Designers and architects must innovate and find better ways of doing things to adapt to the new realities in the new normal. Through this forum, I hope the discussions among the speakers will spur an open and lively exchange of ideas, and more people will be able to recognize the transformative power of design and how it can positively impact lives and shape a better future. I also hope that every designer, especially our local design talents, will be further inspired to push the design boundaries to come up with game-changing innovations. I wish all present success in achieving greater heights in the field of design and architecture. With that, I hand over the time to the MC, Juliana, to introduce the speakers for the forum, and have a good day, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Architect Kwee and Architect Ung for the very encouraging words. And of course, it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator and jury member of the design panel, Melissa Kwee, CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. And on our panel today, we do also have Dick Powell, Jury Chair of Design Panel, co-founder and chairman of Seymour Powell. Architect Chan Soo Khian, Jury Chair of Architecture Panel, Founding Principal and Design Director of SCDA Architects. Lekshmy Parameswaran, Jury Member of Design Panel and co-founder of the Care Lab. And finally, Welby Altidor, Jury Member of Design Panel, Group Chief Creative Officer of City Neon Holdings. So over to you, Melissa.
Hello and good day. I think, Larry, that's a great greeting because we're not sure whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, and it's probably all of the above for everybody here. So good day to everyone. My name is Melissa, and it's a super amazing privilege actually to host this with these four incredible design leaders who have had a chance to spend a little bit of time with over the last couple of days with the President's Design Award, and truly they are each design leaders, design change makers. So you are all in for a super treat actually today. You know, it's the end of 2020, and there was really no better time for us to reflect. If we think about it, we always say time flies so fast, and where did the year go? Well, when one stops to pause and reflect, I think that which we see, and I think this year in particular, the things that we now can't unsee, we can reflect on them a little bit more deeply, and then be a bit more intentional about how we move forward into 2021. I was telling my team today too that this would really be a year where there was a lot of revelation, things that we never saw before. I think Mark spoke about the innovation, the response that was incredible, but we also saw a lot of the gaps, a lot of the challenges and the difficulties there. But this led us to reimagine. And that's the next big R that's there, the revealing, but then the reimagining. And so many people have said we're in for a great reset. We're in for a great reset. So what does that look like? What does that look like in this future that we're approaching now with a K-shaped recovery? Some people doing amazingly, incredible wealth created. At the same time, great challenges for inclusion happening too. Business reflecting on, what is their purpose? What is business for good looking like, going forward? And for design, which touches almost every aspect of life. What then is the role of design, and how are our change leaders, change makers in design actually responding? So we're going to look at all of these different, parts today. But we're going to start by something that's much more personal, actually, which is by asking each of our different panelists. And I think I'll kick off with Dick, because he's so terrific and decided to give us a video around this, which was to introduce themselves around reflecting on what 2020 has kind of meant for them. So let's kick off with Dick. So over to you, Dick, first to introduce yourself and your image.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Well, I don't know whether, well, let's watch the, okay, well, I'm just going to say a few words before we see the video, but I can see the video is running there. So this is the work we did for Virgin Galactic on the design of the spaceship and of the astronaut experience. And it was launched this year. And it was particularly interesting because it required new ways of working for us, of course, forced on us by the pandemic, particularly in the area of virtual reality and augmented reality. And these have really helped us and point the way to the future for designers working in these difficult circumstances. And they've caused us to create or build new skills, which we didn't have before. So I chose that project because also it's a very uplifting and future-facing project that is incredibly exciting to work on. Thank you.
Where to go where no man has gone before.
So. To boldly go.
To boldly go, indeed. Okay, wonderful. So Khian, we're gonna please tell us a little bit more about your observations in the last year and a little bit more about.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to show two images. They are images of New York City, a city that is close to my heart, that I spend a lot of time in, maybe 3 to 4 times a year. And what you're seeing is Times Square, in the middle of the pandemic, how the urban realm has totally changed. Next image. And then when the lockdown was lifted, how the city remorphed itself in a synchronized way and adapt itself to the constraints of not being able to dine indoors. I chose these two images to lead into my talk later on about the regenerative powers of dense cities.
Amazing. Wow. Oh, cities we miss smelling and seeing directly, huh? Amazing. Okay, Lekshmy, tell us a little bit about your reflections on the last year.
Sure. So the Care Lab is based here in Barcelona, in Spain, and we're a very small team. All our projects are done in collaboration with various networks. And when the pandemic hit back in March for us and we went into lockdown, we reached out to a community that we've been part of for about 12 years. It's a global design research network called REACH, and we have 18 partners scattered across 6 continents. And we started to have regular calls every 2 weeks just to check in. It just became a meeting point to share what we were all living through personally, but also what we were experiencing with our design practices in that moment. And we kept up this routine and rhythm, something that we hadn't done in such a structured way over the last years. And through these conversations, what emerged was an opportunity to do a project together. And so we kicked off a project that's called Care Capsules. And the intention was to ask 6 questions around care and how people around the world were experiencing care during the care crisis. And we took each of the partners ran numbers of interviews in different locations, from talking to taxi drivers in Delhi to talking to social workers in the Netherlands. We interviewed this woman here, who is a volunteer here in Barcelona for a foundation called Arrels that work with the homeless. And she normally works within the center, but during the pandemic, she started to hit the streets and go out to support people who were sleeping rough in the streets. And one of those things that Melissa mentioned, of what you see and can't unsee, was the fact that the city as was shown in the earlier image, it was vacated. So actually the homeless and the issues of homelessness were stark in that those were the people that were still living in the streets. And she became a frontline worker in a sense. And this is the other thing that we can't unsee since the pandemic struck, is that various professionals, and in fact, nearly all of us, have come a lot closer to that role of caregiving and also care receiving. And so these new roles emerged around care that we hadn't seen before. We always think of the essential workers in the hospital, but people running the supermarkets became care providers. People delivering food and products to our homes as well became those frontline caregivers. And that was a reframing that I think has impacted our practice and won't be going away anytime soon.
Yeah, amazing. I love the tagline of your organization, redesigning the world of our world of care together. Yeah, I guess it's also affecting all of our lives. And Welby, who I think only speaks in poems, I'm going to ask to share next.
Hi, Melissa. Hi, everybody. I wanted to share two GIFs with you. The first one, I don't know if you can see it properly on your screens, but as a creator of experiences, you know, I also had to ask myself, well, how do we create a better normal? You know, when we look at 2021 and beyond, how do we do that? And certainly for me, a question that has powered my practice you know, throughout the year, a question that I'm sort of obsessed with is, how do we create amazing things amazingly? What do I mean by that? Maybe if you switch to the second GIF. In a way, what I'm obsessed with is, of course, it's about creating beauty, of course, but it's also about how do we create beauty in a way that nurtures the people who are creating that beauty. I've seen too many times a process where we are working towards creating something beautiful, but the process itself is a little bit toxic, is a little bit soul crushing. So part of my role as a creative leader has been to really ask myself, well, how do we create cultures that are deeply innovative, very creative, doing groundbreaking work, but in such a way that is also nurturing the people who are actually doing that work. And I explore those dimensions that you might see clearly or blurry on your screen, but essentially, if I were to summarize them, I think that a little bit like Lekshmy, that you have to start from a place of care. You know, when we think about innovation, we often think about the final product or the final experience, but I sort of think about, you know, how do we create a foundation where care comes first? And that allows us the opportunity to really, you know, secure, you know, safety. You know, I come from the circus world, and one of the first things that you do when you work with acrobats is to install a net before trying to innovate. And that really is something that fosters that trust. And those three elements, the care, you know, the safety and the trust, these are the foundation for me when it comes to doing the heart of what we're talking about when we talk about creativity, which is, you know, playing with danger, playing with constraint, playing with limitations. And I think this is only then that, you know, it triggers those dreams, it triggers that sense of breakthrough that brings us to eventually to grow. And then, you know, once we've grown, once we've really had those breakthroughs, there's always a moment as well that we need to design to recuperate. I find that when we think about this better normal, it is a sort of metaphor, but also maybe a bit of a map for really creating that better normal at multiple levels. So I'm looking forward to the exchanges and the discussion in our panel today around those themes.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Welby. That's so true. I love that thought, the better normal. When we say a new normal, we kind of don't really know what that means other than it just isn't what is now, right? But if we say a better normal, it kind of forces us to give a values perspective actually on that too. So that's something that's interrogating of each one of us. But yeah, better normal. How do we be better, live better, work better, play better in this new space? So I think the one question we want to explore too is how the role of design really has changed or maybe not changed actually, in this context then going forward. I'm wondering, Khian, you spoke a little bit, you kind of teased us a little bit there with your sort of thoughts about sort of cities. Can you say a little bit more about how you think that that's affected us in cities?
I think the role of cities and the nature of dense metropolis has been debated a lot. And as designers, we have gathered with webinars trying to project. But I feel that it's not for us to just project because we are still going through change. The pandemic is still ongoing. But what I do recognize is that the city is organic and is regenerative and is resilient. So the question I ask is, how has COVID impacted the design of cities? But more importantly, is this the end of the dense metropolis? You hear about the flight to the suburbs, people leaving, and then how has the cities adapted? But when I think of a city, I think of it as being very resilient. And the only reference I have is not my own projection, but to look back at history and how people as a whole, together with science and engineers and social scientists, collectively we are resilient, and the cities come back in a stronger, different way. So a lot of times when people ask me, can architects reimagine what the new city will be? I said, no, we can't really, because we need time to look back. But what I do know is that our collaborators, our engineers that I work with all the time, they could be the real heroes. You look at cholera, you get better sewers, and maybe you COVID better mechanical engineering HVAC. But in our role as designers, we tend to be so heroic, and sometimes our collaborators and consultants take a second role to realize our vision. But I really think this time designers need to open up and observe the ground and collaborate with more people, more stakeholders, need to be involved with policymakers. This is really a collective effort that will evolve. But what I do know from observation is that this particular time, Melissa, is a brilliant time also because you see people adapting technology, virtual meetings, etc. And so be it with the cities.
Yes.
Some of Jane Jacobs writing about the role of the city and the sidewalk in the public realm, all of a sudden it's happening. Most of the time it happens organically through market forces. Businesses die and maybe you take on certain planning roles to allow outdoor eating. But the slide I showed was that when the cars are deprioritized, you can actually have one lane. You don't need so many lanes. And why is it the car is reduced to one lane? Because people want bigger sidewalks. They don't want to be chock-a-block. So they prioritize space for pedestrians. And then the regular sidewalk dining goes to the street. And after that, you provide another bike lane because people feel unsafe being in Ubers and Grabs. So these are the kinds of observation I think designers need to look at and to contribute to it rather than, again, reimagine and reimpose them. I believe organic change is important, and I believe designers need to look at what they can do to reinforce the trend. But what I do know is that some of the values that come out from this change will stay. There'll be a demand for new luxury of outdoor spaces, fresh air, access to nature, maybe even as my other panelists said, we discovered beauty, qualities like that. And this more humanist side of us came out because we are locked down. We all have time to think. We travel less. For example, I think my typical year involves traveling over 200 days. Now, a beautiful stretch of 10 months. It's not easy, but I do have the time to rethink. And what came out from this was that the role of the designer should not be a heroic one, not in the time of pandemic. That's what the thought that came to my mind immediately, especially more apparent in very dense urban cities. So as we go along, I'm sure some of my esteemed panelists will have some thoughts and we can have some discussion. But what I wanted to say is that I've been attending a lot of webinars, whether it's on sustainability or the role of designers in sustainability. I think it's time for designers to collaborate more on a broader scale with other disciplines in the humanities.
Yeah, and that just helps to, I think what was really revealed in that respect was really the magnitude of the challenges that are around us. And I suppose, you know, you do it yourself when everything that can be done just requires you. But when the challenge and the what is possible and maybe what is even needed now is greater, then perhaps that common purpose is what brings about that desire to collaborate and reach beyond, you know, one's normal, you know, typical ways of working.
Yeah, that is true, Melissa. Now, for example, why should cities even change? If the vaccine comes back in a strong way, this would be a period of a very bad period in history, but cities will come back and may come back. Look at Spanish flu, then you have roaring 20s. When people are suppressed, they come back and they spend. Then you have the Great Depression. So I really don't know, but what was humbling for me was the role of science. And the role of science and the role of engineers are magnified. And we are part of the whole ecosystem. We may design a part of it, the delivery systems, the transportation, or even the design of certain facilities that are needed.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, so leaning into those relationships in the community and establishing sort of mutuality in some ways too. And I think, Lekshmy, that's what you kind of spoke about too, is how it kind of then activated, you know, all these different relationships and communities and people just stepped forth and stepped out actually beyond their various comfort zones too. How are you sort of seeing design, you know, that perspective on design changing in the community, in the healthcare space, with the elderly populations, with care homes? What is that opening up for you?
Building on what Khian was mentioning, it's true that many healthcare and care providers really struggled to reach what they call the last mile of care during the pandemic. So that was really the last mile being on the neighborhood scale, in the community scale. And that's where here, actually in Barcelona, also a very dense city, you saw grassroots organizations and neighborhood associations gathering together in the sense of solidarity and actually delivering that kind of care, whether that's dropping off groceries for your next door neighbor or helping out with childcare. I think that was a phenomenon that was heightened during this period, but it really did shine a light on how institutions and our care systems and services are set up and why they were unable to respond to some of these needs. And I wanted to share specifically about some work that we are doing in Singapore and in Spain, both in the long-term care and end-of-life care space. And these are quite extreme care services, and yet they relate to an aging population, and they reveal a lot of taboos and preconceptions that we hold about growing old and the stigmas that lie around death and dying. And of course, through this pandemic, I think our relationship to these topics really changed everywhere in the world. And some of the care homes that we've been working with, and more importantly, the care teams that we saw, who on a daily basis are those essential workers, but under these conditions of the pandemic, they really needed to invent new ways on the fly to figure out how they were going to cope with caring for the elderly and caring for the dying. And in that regard, our role as designers in these projects was to carry the torch of the innovation work that we'd begun, because they were so busy on the front line having to deal with far greater and more urgent situations. So we had to keep the projects alive. We had to give them space. We had to not leave their side. We had to journey with them and keep in touch with them. And so the touch points with these care teams reduced in frequency and became open spaces where we would just check in and see how they were doing and listen a lot, very deeply, to what they were working through as a team. And this was universal. The conversations we were having in Singapore with hospice care teams and the conversations here with nursing home teams. And there came a point where we realized that the innovation culture had somehow shifted in their organizations. Whereas when we began these projects of service transformation a year ago, there was a lot of resistance. What are the designers doing here? Why are we thinking about doing things in a new way? The pandemic kind of opened up the purpose behind this transformation, and it actually helped people to align around it. So we saw momentum growing and enthusiasm within the teams and an urgency to want to make changes and do things differently. So although everything slowed down, it also picked up. And that was a really interesting tension. And I think the point about humility and the point about stepping back as a designer and really listening to what people are sharing with you, either verbally but also non-verbally. And of course, as we start to work digitally, we lose some of this tactile interaction that we're used to, but it requires us to listen even more carefully for what people are living through, and therefore how can we support this change. And I just want to end maybe with a reflection that came out from these conversations that's very positive, is that I think we can carry that torch of hope because I see opportunities for all of us to go through growth, and for services and institutions and organizations to really grow, as Welby showed in his beautiful dynamic illustration, that's also an advocacy role for design, to bring that hope and that possibility of reinvention for something better coming out from all of this hardship of the last year.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And actually, you talk about it in terms of, our health systems and care systems and things like that, and being attentive to the human experience. For somebody who is very sick and an older person who cannot see other people, in their last days, just because of COVID restrictions and things like that, is terrifying. But even on a very everyday level too, just I think so many of us in our own organizations have just experienced how that generalized anxiety in the system actually has affected us too. And Dick, you talked a little bit about like the ways that we work, and Welby, you talked about that too, how this affects us in our ways of working, in how we create, but also how we just manage our relationships, our teams, and even things like that. The cultures you talked about, within our organizations. How do you think? I mean, how has this affected you, and what out of this is shifting how you're moving forward? Maybe leave that open to Dick or Welby to kick off.
Okay, well, so I'll go first on that, if you like. I think the good news is that business is more the same than it is different as a consequence of the pandemic. I mean, we've all had to adapt and change. And the interesting thing is that business itself, we're a design and innovation agency, effectively working for different clients. And they've had to reach out for help from us to figure out how to keep things as normal as possible and to maintain good working relationships and get projects delivered. We're 60 people based in London, and when this first hit, it was super tough. Everybody had to work from home, learn how to do that. We used to call it working from home. That used to be a sort of signal for actually taking a bit of time off, but things have changed now, and we've had to learn how to do that. We've had to invest in putting sort of measures in place within the office, so COVID related social distancing measures, better audio, video, and all the rest of that. But the really big thing has been the development of better skills in virtual reality and augmented reality. I mean, we always had these capabilities. We've been building new VR tools, in fact, to help with that. And I showed Virgin Galactic because it's a good case study for working virtually. You know, we were able to build physical prototypes of seats, for example, and we would have a prototype in our office, and Virgin would have one in their offices in Mojave, and we could actually put those into virtual spaceship so that, you know, people could sit in the chair, you know, do all the things that they would be doing as an astronaut, and then they could feed that back to us. We could make changes, they could make changes. So we did all that. And then I think the other really big change that's affecting us as designers is that, you know, was that the whole PR launch of Virgin Galactic was done with virtual reality. You know, we programmed 120 headsets, which were sent out to various media channels, and that meant that the Virgin Galactic team could individually take journalists around the whole thing, you know, through the spaceport, through a 360-degree exhibition center, introduce them to the seats and the layout of the spaceship, actually go into the spaceship and actually take them up into space. So, you know, when we think about the implications of that, I think, and by the way, we also did an augmented reality app, which allows anybody to download the app and then to put a 3D version of the seat or the spaceship on their kitchen table and go around it, look at it, zoom in on it, and so on. So these are really important for our future, these new tools, because if you think about it, all of business, our clients, they're used to launching new products through exhibitions and events, and now that's not possible, at least, you know, not immediately anyway. And if you imagine you're in, for example, the luxury products end of business and you make high-end watches, you know, that you don't buy a $30,000 watch by pressing add to basket. You know, there's a whole experience missing there that needs to be replaced. So these tools will allow those sort of people to have a relationship and a direct sales relationship with people buying their products. You know, but as headsets reduce in price, as people like Apple and others are developing new kinds of glasses which allow you to experience augmented reality, I think all of these tools are really, really important for our future. And another big project we've been doing recently is a spinal implant, which is something that a surgeon puts in your spine. And you may say, well, what's a designer got to do with that? Well, we were able, by working with surgeons, to come up with an innovative solution. But the big change is that now we can train surgeons and train hospitals and nurses in how to use those new products virtually. We can show them the operation, we can instruct them how to use it, and all that is done virtually. That saves money and speeds things up, and is a better way of going forward in the future. So the pandemic has forced change upon us in the way that we work. Good things, yes. Bad things too, because we have less time in the creative environment with our colleagues coming up with ideas, but we've worked hard to try and make that happen.
I think definitely for you as a sort of leader in the innovation space, I mean, this must have just been like 10 years worth of work, just kind of accelerated, you know, into this period of time too, where just the need, you know, to create more, you know, immersive and tactile experiences just in the absence of actually physically being there, you know, must be so an amazing design challenge. And it's, I mean, actually, Welby, it sounds a little bit like, you know, what you do too, you know, just those immersive environments, those immersive experiences, which are sensual, which are beautiful. You know, can you, how has that also impacted that sort of, you know, immersive and sort of entertainment realm too?
It's really interesting because, you know, at Big Lab and at City Neon, you know, that's what we do, right? We create experiences that bring people closer together. So how do you do that during a pandemic? And, you know, and it's interesting as well because VR in that context is the exact opposite than what Dick was describing. It's almost like the no-go technology because of the proximity, because of, how do you scale an experience like this, and so on and so on. So of course it has really pushed us to explore, for example, how do we create experiences that are contactless, but that still create, as Dick was mentioning, this sense of a relationship, and in our case, very often a sense of magic. So in a way, one of the immediate impact was really the reflection on interactivity, and how do we push that interactivity. For a long time, interactivity mostly meant a screen that you touch, and that was it. But what's exciting right now is really exploring new ways to create that connection and that relationship between the guest and an experience that we want to offer to our guests. We've been lucky because some of our experiences have been launched in China, and therefore we've had, even through the pandemic, a number of projects that had a chance to still be presented in a context of the pandemic. So we had a lot of great learnings. But as I said, I think it's really interesting to explore both the contactless experience, but that still creates something that is magical. And we're really observing that our guests, they want to be recognized in the space. They want, even more than ever, an experience where they are sort of seen as who they are individually, and they want to keep memories of that. And sometimes they want to escape to an experience that's closer to where they are, because there's less traveling. But we're observing as well that people still, there's this hunger to travel somewhere, to escape somewhere. So the offer from an entertainment standpoint, takes this new dimension, and I guess contributes to that better normal.
Wow, that's fascinating. I think being able to both create that sense of relationship, as you sort of say, and how we do that now that maybe our audiences and our cities actually are so diverse, actually, too. I would like to actually swing us over, though, I realize, to some of the questions that have come in. So I want to pick that up with one person here who has asked us, in the era of Industry 4.0, or the fourth industrial revolution, and the advent of AI, cyber-physical development, and etc., how do you think the fields of design will potentially evolve? I think I'm going to maybe lob that over to Dick, maybe to kick us off, but I would love to hear from others too.
I love this. I mean, we are at the beginning of what we might even think of as a science fiction age. We've recently witnessed and are seeing the development of virtual versions of ourselves, which we can put ourselves into these virtual spaces and have the kind of experiences that Welby's been talking about. That requires enormous artificial intelligence to actually produce and run those things at scale. So we know, because we speak to these people, these things are happening, where we are just that far away from having a virtual version of ourselves that we can, through that avatar, we can experience some of these things. And people were writing novels about these things, only 10 years ago, and yet they are, they're upon us, and they're enabled by massive advances in all kinds of things. And the pandemic has just accelerated all of that. So it's a fantastic time, I think.
And Dick, I would say that I love that you say the age of science fiction, in a way, or the avatar. It's almost like I would push it and say the age of the metaphor. Are we about to become metaphors in our own ways? I think it's an open question, but it's certainly an intriguing one, and it's hard, at least from where I stand, to decipher what will that all mean, for us.
it's hard to see the future, isn't it, when but we are actually in it. You know, I often say the future is more the same than different, and it's difficult to see the changes because of that. But nonetheless, we are in a period of fantastic change. And so, you know, obviously the person who asked this question knows about these things and is you know, following all these developments, and it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, I think that it's amazing. I think it presents both the sort of utopic and dystopic kind of like potential. That's
exactly right. Yes,
true,
it can all
right?
go terribly wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I love that
I wonder-
Khian referred to, you know, when you were talking about the city and how it's resilient. You know, for me, I kept on hearing the word solidarity in a way, you know, there was the sense that the reason why there is that, you know, more resilience at certain places and then less at others is almost like that glue is that ability collectively to express a certain form of solidarity so that we can live together in a way that, you know, that flows and makes more sense. You know, I don't know if you would qualify that way, but at least that's the word that came very strongly to me.
I think cities are most known for isolation, but how do you move from isolation to solidarity? Khian, any thoughts on that? And I'd like to actually pull in Lekshmy in a second to kind of get some thoughts on the AI piece, but right after this, because it's a love to hear from you, Khian.
You know, solidarity is important. Special interest groups, lobbies are important. But what I know is that it presents an opportunity to reset for a more equal and generous, caring society. The economic forces of decimating office use, for example, that's an opportunity to repurpose. And if there's lobby and there's policies, it could become, for example, elderly housing in the city. Why not? It's diversity, right? Or it could be artist housing or subsidized housing. So the segmentation of zoning of cities are a lot more woven together. But of course, it takes time for change because there's the attitude of not in my backyard.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think depending on policies and politics and the kind of society you're in, whether your government is authoritative and top-down and caring and paternalistic, or you're grown-up democratic, this is an amazing time and a scary time as well. It can swing both ways.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, it's so true that I love that thought about, you know, repurposing office space to be so much more intentional about integration in the city. You know, they always talk about what freeways did to Los Angeles, because when suddenly the low income housing was out of sight and out of mind, because you could literally just fly over it on the freeway, you know, there became, you know, a greater social divide just because I never saw anybody. And you never thought it was an issue. But yeah, Lekshmy, some thoughts from you on that too.
Yeah, I think I recognize this tension that we're talking about, and I think just to circle back to the new technologies and the possibilities that they can bring, I think they also bring a set of choices for ourselves. So if I look at those possibilities, just take, for example, the story of the care homes and families who were not able to be together when they were losing their loved ones. The role of technology there, and I think we talked about this with Welby earlier on, the possibility of applying all of those immersive and experiential technologies to actually let people have a sense of being together and of their community and of that intimacy that is so essential to all of us, but particularly at the end of life and in those last moments. How can we, or should we be taking those technologies and bringing them to people so that we're not seeing FaceTime farewells, which is the way that some people had to let go and say goodbye to their loved ones during the pandemic. Protocols did start to be broken down. So, for example, ordinarily families wouldn't be allowed to go into a care home to be there for the last days or hours, but one family member was able to go in, and so they were rewriting protocols to humanize them, to respond to the situation. But I think as easily as we might consider, do we want to bring new technologies in here, I think we also have to confront our own humanity and think, well, what kind of care are we willing to give in these situations? And what we saw is that the care professionals became family to these residents and to these elderly because the family couldn't be there. So they stepped outside or beyond their professional role. But in fact, they absolutely were following their intention and purpose in the work that they do. And so they became the family when the family couldn't be present. And I think we have to also be open to explore those possibilities to get closer to one another, as well as thinking of what possibilities technology can bring when that may not be possible. But I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a hybrid, messy, confronting, challenging, but beautiful set of possibilities in front of us.
Yeah. It's up to us to be human and imagine, right? So wonderful. There is a question actually that's just come up too on, I guess, I'm wondering if there's a particular person it's directed to, but it says, what are your views on a design approach or movement that is a fusion of East and West in terms of culture, art, and principles of sustainability, technology, and economic development? Wow, that's like a lifelong quest question. But,
I mean, my reaction would just be that it hasn't it always been that way, that there has always been those influences, you know, from East and West. And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear from, you know, my colleague who's here, you know, in Singapore as well. But my sense at least is that I've always been inspired by the East when I was in the West, and you know, there's always been this sort of circulation and breathing between those two poles.
Can I go?
yeah, please.
Sorry to disappoint, but we're more the same than we are different. And you know, what's happened in the last 50 years is actually we've become one humanity, and there is less difference between East and West than ever before. And you know, when we're creating things, we're really creating them for everybody. But it's only when you get into, you know, particular aspects of art and culture obviously very important, that you really have to take those things into account. But I welcome a future where we're more the same than we are different, and we're one humanity.
Yeah, that is very true. Lekshmy, let's hear from you.
I want to respond to that, something around the topic of growth and growth, not just in terms of economic growth, but also as a practice, as a profession, and personally. And this was on Welby's wonderful moving diagram as well. But I think there's a need for us to reconsider, what do we mean by growth and at what cost? And somehow in this question, we're looking at all of the different elements that make for success, for sustainability, but also for a form of growth. And I would say it isn't always about being able to do more, to be bigger, to be better. And it harkens a little bit to Suchian's values around humility as well, and understanding our place in the world, and understanding the kind of relationships and collaborations we might need to make horizontally, vertically, all around us, in order to achieve impact. And this is where it links back to PDA, and what makes this award so special and the program so special is that we're not just talking about growth in a very simplistic way. We're really looking at levels of impact that range from economic to social, and ultimately I think that's, at least for me, a better pointer than necessarily talking about growth, talking about the formal traditional model of growth.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of people now that are really, you know, questioning, is growth really the only or even the best way to be about it? And perhaps growth is the principle of cancer, and growth for growth's sake is the principle of cancer. The growth for purpose, you know, is perhaps a little bit more redeeming. And I'm just curious, you know, for all of you now too, what would you say would I mean, since the President's Design Award now has been kind of shifted in a sense to focus on this idea of impact, you know, and the purpose in a sense of design. What is one area of impact that you're working on right now that you can kind of that you'd like to highlight actually as an area that has kind of shifted, you know, with your maybe sharper sense of purpose?
I can try to answer that. This is relative to our own, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is your perspective. This is from you.
When we were in a highly globalized traveling world, we acknowledge certain urgent things we have to do, like sustainability. But when you're locked down and you see the impact of what the lockdown could do, or on a personal level, I know that I can't make that change myself because the momentum of our work and the market is very strong. So the only way I can do that is to collaborate. So we try to pair up, for example, a group called Palais for the Oceans, their ocean group, and we help them design their research center on an island. And then we form SCDA lab and we try to collaborate with NTU, or we need other people to come in. So I'm starting to realize that the last few years when we're actually very actively traveling and designing and flying around, you're consuming so much and doing so much. And the only way we can change and force change is to have other companies that are strong come into our practice. That's what we're trying to do. And on the smaller scale, SCDA Lab, we try to create this. It's not uncommon, but we want to create parts out of containers, which is very normal for most designers to use, but totally off-grid. Solar and compostable toilet, water harvesting. And we have created prototypes now and actually built it so that we can try to set it up. It's a small project, but it allows the studio to get their hands dirty and start thinking about it. That's what we're trying to do.
I'm just curious, you know, so Khian, what's the impact of that been on your team?
It has been very positive. We reimagined Tenda, or Indonesian for tent, as a new way of travel. And not just in the product itself, but to redefine hospitality as experience-based, as dependable on community. For example, Tenda should be set up within an hour or two from a village, and your food will come from the village. So we're reimagining the whole ecosystem of hotels. Wow. So it's not just architecture. I'm just trying to broaden.
So the more, so designers operating kind of transdisciplinarily in that sense.
With local communities, involving them and sort of giving back. Because when I think of these tenders, they can only be in remote places. And increasingly new millennials, they like to travel, not in total luxury, but for a cause. So that has been a very nice side project, a great distraction from architecture and doing luxury, which we do a lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Any other changes? Just curious for you in any of your lives, Welby or Dick or Lekshmy too. Just this sharpened sense with your practices.
Yes, I mean, I think I sort of touched on it a bit earlier, but I mean, we have a team at Seymour Powell called Foresight, and their job is to map the future. They're a research team and a strategy team, and their work has really rocketed because clients are finding it harder than ever before to really track the changes in people's lives that affect the things that we buy and use every day, and they need creative people like our Foresight team to research and find out how these changes are affecting people so that we can make better products, you know. And that's why also I mentioned the spinal implant. You know, there are huge medical companies out there whose job it is to create these kind of very small but detailed parts that go in our bodies. And you would say, well, why designers? You know, what are designers doing there? But what we were able to do was to work with the surgeons, extensively with the surgeons. The research team could work with the surgeons and listen to the surgeons and watch what they did, rather than just kind of do some, you know, corporate research. We were able to actually observe them in action and put ideas to them so that we could together co-create something that would ultimately make a difference.
Wow.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of co-creation. And it's certainly an area that we're exploring, especially because if I take your question, Melissa, from a more macro level, what we try to do every day is simple yet complex at the same time. I've mentioned it before, but we're really trying to take those really fun, inspiring stories, and we try to bring people who are perhaps would never go to the same space together to experience, those different spaces. And we think that this is a way to essentially bring people who maybe feel very different in a world where it's sometimes not promoted to have people who are different, who are being in the same space together. So in a way, for us, and for me, certainly, that's a big motivation to my work, is how do we create those spaces? How do we create those experiences that brings those people together? And maybe for 2 hours, for 1 hour, suddenly they realize, as Dick was mentioning earlier, there is much more that connects us, that makes us different or divergent from each other, and it's something to celebrate.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Lekshmy, I think you wanted to mention.
Yes, I want to join in the celebrating. When we set up the Care Lab, our intention was to create a platform to enable others who feel strongly about transforming care to meet one another. And so that means going well beyond the design discipline, but also opening the doors to anyone and everyone who thinks that we can do an awful lot better in how we care for each other. And so through this year, this incredible year, we found that one of the things that really sharpened in my mind about our practice is that as we were journeying with the various groups that we work with, and that is already fairly multidisciplinary and international, we found an opportunity to actually connect those people to support one another. And so to create a platform, and because we could work online, we could literally stitch up stories from around the globe and have people come together, not necessarily with an intention of creating something, but of beginning a conversation and sharing some of the frustrations, some of the challenges, just offloading basically some of their issues in trying to, for example, keep their social service running within Singapore, with city council members here who are trying to do exactly the same thing, but in a Barcelona city context, or connecting people who are pushing on a level of policy and more structural change with grassroots organizations and frontline workers. So we found there was a chance to actually be the platform, be the connector, and in a way, it's an aspect, I think, of design moving forward that is important for us to recognize, that through those conversations will then be opportunities for us to apply our designerly capabilities and skills. But maybe the first thing we need to do is to just let people meet one another who have common interest and purpose in mind.
Mm. And how do we then design organizations or cities or spaces then to facilitate that?
I think that part of that conversation is finding the leaders within those different groups. So within here in Barcelona, within the city council, we work very closely with the social rights team, which is a diverse group that are working on a number of different social topics within the city context. But they have they're in their bubble, and quite rightly so. They have so much to focus on. But by connecting them with urban planners and strategists and designers who are working on community-based service solutions, it opens their eyes and vice versa. So I think that in these connecting of worlds is where the creativity and new possibilities can flourish, and the energy levels just go up, because suddenly they start to see, to absorb new ideas, no, from outside of their particular realm. So it's about dot connecting. And I feel that this year, a lot of our practice has also been about that, and sets the stage for some of the transformations that you mentioned. Like, how do we design, or the better questions to ask ourselves, right? How do we design our cities to be resilient to all kinds of crises, not just a care crisis?
Yeah, I'd say another aspect of this is how do we create experiences and space that allow people to be recognized? You know, so it's a form of personalization, but I think personalization can sound a little bit corporate. But how do I get recognized in this space? You know, for who I am, wherever I am. That's, you know, an area where I'm very intrigued to leverage technology to create those little moments of magic, you know, where maybe you go through a life and you know, people don't necessarily have a lot of opportunity to be recognized and appreciated for who they are. And suddenly, you know, the space, you know, maybe people around you recognize you, acknowledge who you are, acknowledge something that you love. That's always something special, especially when you're not expecting it. So I think that's an area where we're doing a lot of research to create those small moments.
Actually, that's so true. The question of how you create, I think part of it is around having people feel like they're seen, as opposed to just being an anonymous kind of dot, you know, floating around in the ether. And I suppose when people are seen, when people are valued, and when people do feel valued, their gifts are more easily brought forth. You know, and that's actually, I think, what we've seen within this last year is the need for really everybody to sort of step forth and step into that as well. I have a question, you know, for us around the role of design in education. Actually, you know, it sounds like there's almost skill sets now that are almost competencies of design that are almost like life skills. It sounds like, you know, for you, if you were advising, let's just say for hypothetical sort of like purposes sake, you know, an education system, a government system, what would you say would be key competencies we are currently lacking, or key competencies we would need to amplify in this new, better normal, from a designer's perspective?
Well, shall I start with that?
Let's go, Dick.
Yeah, I mean, I think here in the UK, you know, when we talk about our education system, we introduced design and technology into the school curriculum many years ago. And that had an enormous effect, actually, on the creative industries. We have a very potent creative industries here in the UK, and one of the reasons for that is because of introducing design and technology into the classroom at the age of 8. But sadly, because of politics and this, that, and the other, that has gradually become diluted to the point where now it's verging on the non-existent, and that is going to have a catastrophic effect on the education of our children, exacerbated, of course, by the pandemic and their inability to actually practice a lot of the things that they're being taught. So right now, I think if you ask me the question, what could we do? It would be to put design and technology back into schools and give it a serious push, you know, and you know, we are very kind of based in our schooling system these days on the things that you can add and count and put on a spreadsheet, you know, not the creative skills that a lot of kids are really good at, and that needs nurturing.
And where would you focus that education?
From a very early age, you know, just like we did before. I mean, it's become diluted, but you know, the kids were doing design and technology at the age of 8.
Wow. So just when you're starting school, it's like, go build your toys.
You know, it's difficult, obviously, with the pandemic, but designing technology at the age of 8, kids could go into a workshop and make things, and accept challenges and figure out how things work, and it's sorely missing in education, I think, that almost what we used to call the vocational skills, but they are so important, I think, to education.
And maybe to reinforce what Dick is saying here, and just to circle back to what I was sharing at the beginning, for me, I see a net, and yes, there's that cliche of giving people space to fail, but frankly, that workshop that Dick is referring to, that sense of experimentation, means that many times what you will try will not work. And it's still very surprising today to see in a new generation where there's such a fear of failing and such a sort of adoration almost of trying to be perfect. And it's really something that stifles your ability to push, and try things and experiment. But it's very hard to do this when there's no net. It's very hard to say to an acrobat, please experiment with this new figure, with triple salto and whatnot, but there's no net, there's no security. You basically have to, make it work the first time. So I would say, add more nets, early age education.
And I'm just wondering whether parents are almost the first educators too. But Khian, sorry, you were going to say something.
I mean, to Welby's point, that sense of security, especially in regard to our education system here, the introduction of basic design thinking is important, lateral thinking, because so much of our education is about finding a solution, empirical solutions, or quantifying success. And it is the parents, even when we want to loosen up, the parents are so concerned about being able to measure. So when you want to impose a new way of educating kids, you do have to educate the parents. And I on that point itself, that's for the younger kids' education. But on the tertiary level in university, I see a trend towards broadening in architecture schools about cross-disciplinary studying. But I think we need to separate it into two streams. One is very general, and you still need to keep one stream that's very traditional, which is the professional stream. But the guys that are general can fit into all kinds of work. In the new economy, they can be bankers, they can be anything. So I think design education is very valuable.
And there's almost a mindset sort of change that needs to sort of happen, I think, because I think at least traditionally here it's been sort of valued as less than say going to be your banker or lawyer or whatever. But going back to our AI conversation, we know which jobs are also kind of going away. So maybe there is a sort of redeeming element to being able to ask the right questions and sort of like be human and imagine and build, right? Yeah. Lekshmy, your thoughts on the education piece too?
Yes, because last year we came across this book called The 100-Year Life, which is written by an economist and psychologist. Now, some of you may know it. Yes. And when you think about how we build up skills in the education system in a very linear way, 20 years of learning, and then we need to end up being able to work into our 80s now, so those skills just becoming obsolete, then where I feel some the design mindset could actually play a role in that is in enabling kids and at a young age to realize that they can and they should expect to reinvent themselves over and over and over throughout a lifetime. So it isn't about skilling up, getting that job and hanging on to one definition of success in terms of professional life. And we've seen over the course of this year, with everything being shaken up, that in order to be resilient as individuals and to thrive in this really uncertain and unpredictable world, is the ability to be able to reflect, ask yourself what matters, to define your own question, your own direction, and to have the skills, but also the courage to try things in a new way and to reinvent. And children do this naturally. We just sort of drain it out of them along the way. What we need to be doing is building that reflective practice, and also constructive and dreaming practice that should be part of then the way in which we define success, because it's about sustaining and ongoingly sustaining and looking after one another in that process.
I'd say there's something almost counterintuitive to it, because in a way it's about, raising entrepreneurial artists or entrepreneurial creators, who are able to, as Lekshmy is saying, is, reinvent, not only reinvent themselves, but recognize new opportunities as well.
Yeah, actually, and really just having that perspective to learn. This is a funny thing, but it's actually true. My 100-year-old grandmother made me these earrings, and she kind of picks up new skills every year. So she's now into like necklace making. So, but it's just, I suppose, just maintaining that curiosity and learning posture. No matter how old you are. But I think we have one question I actually just want to wrap up with, and we have 160 odd whatever participants here watching actually on this call right now too, and many of them are designers or design enthusiasts, some policymakers too. But what advice would you give actually to designers, your people in a sense too, our people, about how to thrive, how to stay relevant, how to flourish in this better normal, as Welby said. What's one piece of advice that you would give, and maybe why that piece of advice?
Who do you want to start?
Anybody with that urge.
All right. I'll start by saying this. I think work from a place of conviction and openness. So I think it's both important to, develop that intimacy with that voice that you have, where you feel, this intuition that tells you, I want to go in that direction, or I think this is the right angle or the right approach. Yet at the same time, find that muscle of openness and ability to also recognize from the environment, from feedback and so on, what are those pearls, that gold that you're receiving from people around you in their comments and their reaction, positive, negative. Essentially don't take anything personally. It does become a superpower when it comes to designing things.
Awesome. Thanks, Welby.
Can I go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Core bit of advice first would be don't give up. Right, this is the most rewarding job you can do. I mean, I think being in a creative industry and doing these things, contributing to society, is the most fantastic thing to do. But the pragmatic piece of advice I would say to young designers is, focus on something you're really good at. Because design is such a broad church that and too many designers try to do a bit of everything. But you could really make a contribution if you focus on the one thing in that whole range of possibilities and do it really well.
I love it.
I would build on both of those fantastic pieces of advice. Once you realize your conviction and you connect with the community around you, and as Dick says, you realize what you can bring to that, I would say ask yourself, how can you have the biggest impact for everything that you do? Through the community, through the use of your superpower, your skill. How can you scale it and spread it to bring that uniqueness to touch as many lives as possible? You need to ask yourself this question.
Awesome, love it. Impact.
Lastly, that is one of the hardest questions, because I've answered it in different forms at different times at the end of every interview. But when you throw in COVID, it's so different. I just want to say a very practical level for designers. If you're looking for work right now, it's very difficult, but you can work outside your field. Because as you work on many different areas outside your field, the dots will connect. Because our field is so broad, They all will connect. And the only thing you need to do is not lose your bearings. You're a designer, be curious, believe in it, stay through, be yourself. So know yourself, but you can dabble. For example, if you're a graphic designer, you can be a construction worker. I think they all connect. It's about process and materiality. And the last bit of advice is, I don't think globalization is dead. We need to think broad. We're all connected virtually, so it's still a very globalized world.
I love it. That's great. So we have stand with conviction and openness. Don't give up. Go deep. Think about how to have the biggest impact with your work. Be curious. Be yourself. Globalization is not dead. Okay. So I think it just leaves me to thank these amazing panelists. Thank you for being who you are and doing what you do in this space. We are definitely, I feel encouraged at least that we can create a better future by design with you all out there. So that is amazing. I just want to now actually hand it back to our MC. So thank you.
Say one last thing, Melissa, you've done a fantastic job weaving us together the last couple hours. And even though we're on such different fields, you know, you managed to make the whole talk seem like one coherent, synchronized discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, giving thanks to you all.
And an honor, dear colleagues, to share the Zoom screen with all of you.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Back to our MC.
Definitely very insightful sharing. Thank you so much once again to Melissa and all of our panelists for that. So with that, we have actually come to the end of our webinar, and we'll really appreciate it if you could help us to complete a simple survey for this webinar at the same time to help us improve on our future programs. A link to this form is also being shared right now via the Zoom chat. And if you would like to find out more about the various upcoming programs at the National Design Center, do also scan the QR code that you see on the screen. Thank you once again to all of our speakers and to all of you for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. We most definitely hope to see you again at our future events. And with that, we shall end the webinar with a short inspirational video. This video is an open letter from Singapore to the world about our commitment to staying together and working with businesses to emerge stronger together despite the ongoing pandemic. Thank you and enjoy.
Dear world, once upon a time, we had an impossible idea to turn sea into land and land into one of the busiest airports in the world. A gateway for dreamers, a runway for believers. But now, our world is not quite the same. We are in the toughest crisis of our generation. Our skies are quieter, and our streets too. But it's also in this quiet that you can hear the belief, and in the emptiness, see the resolve and resilience of our people. And just like once upon a time, we now look not at what we see, but at who we are, and not at what if, but what's next. A people who stare impossible challenges in the face and say no. We won't be beaten. Planes can be grounded, but our spirit, never. Dear world, together, we will rise again.